you can embellish a little bit, but don't lie. Like, people will find out if you're lying.
This is very important.
He signed the papers on the steps of the welfare office where his family used to collect checks.
Wow.
Make sure you hit on those 3 points: the problem, the solution, and why you.
Okay, Josh.
This is one of the other biggest mistakes I see founders make, and it can be brutally destructive.
If you are in the market that goes like this, maybe you raise a little bit more than you need.
And ideally, if you haven't heard from an investor in a few days, that is a red flag for sure.
Is it a good strategy?
Yes, always. If you're the best builder in the world, it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to raise funding. And so I'm hoping today to kind of teach you all the dark arts, the sort of secret green and red flags to look out for to make yourself feel investable and make it so that your vision of the future feels inevitable and everybody wants to get behind it.
Josh Constine, a venture partner at SignalFire, at $2.1 billion early-stage VC fund that builds AI to help its portfolio companies with recruiting and sales. Josh focuses on pre-seed and consumer and leads SignalFire's PR advisory program for its portfolio. And previously, Josh was editor-at-large for TechCrunch and was ranked the #1 most cited tech journalist in 2016 to 2020 by TechMeme. He also has moderated over 225 on-stage interviews in 18 countries with leaders like Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and whistleblower Edward Snowden. Josh holds a master's degree in cyber psychology from Stanford University, where he studied the influence of technology on social interaction. And your co-host, Kristina Subbotina, I've been a corporate lawyer for the past 8+ years, representing startups and venture funds throughout their life cycle, from formation to exit. Most recently, I worked at Cooley, which is big law firm famous for working with startups and venture capital. Before that, I worked at 2 venture-backed startups as the associate general counsel. And now I run my own legal company, Lawlace, which is a law firm for startups. And I also run a legal product company, Lexsy, to help founders with their legal needs. Josh, let's start with the beginning, right? Founders here joined us to learn how to raise money for their startup, how to craft their story. And at the end, I'll talk about a little bit about due diligence and how to be ready. I'll share the horror stories. But first of all, I would love to pass the baton to you to learn from your experience. What is the best way for startups to raise venture money and, craft their story?
Absolutely. I'm super excited to share the sort of behind the scenes story of what it takes to become investable from venture capitalists. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of what should your essential pitch feel like? How do you run a great fundraising process? And how do you come across as somebody who is never going to quit no matter what happens? And so let's just start with what it takes to have a great pitch, because whether you're doing a 20-minute call with a VC or you just meet somebody and in 2 minutes you're trying to convince them to lean in, to want to schedule that call, I think it all comes down to a 3-part pitch formula. The first part is the problem. One of the biggest mistakes that I see founders make is originally they want to just dive really deep into their biography. But I want to know why you have founder market fit. And I won't know that until I know what you're building. So before you talk about your deep bio, you need to tell me what is broken with the world. And so this is what I call the problem statement. This is designed to create a sense of emotional resonance with investors. You are often going to understand your problem that you're solving a lot better than the VCs you're pitching it to. So you need to make them feel it in their heart that there's something broken with the world, not just, at a societal level, but anecdotally at like a single person's micro level that like this really hurts individuals. So typically what I like to do here is talk about, one person's story. This is what you as the original customer for your business, or what somebody struggling with this problem, how they feel, why it's holding back their ability to build a business, why it's blocking them from finding fulfillment or like achieving their dreams in life, and talking about the struggle that they have. This is somebody who goes to work every day and they spend all day in emails trying to coordinate with their coworkers, just trying to figure out what they should be doing rather than actually getting things done. So the first thing you need to do is tell me the problem for some individual, and then you need to zoom out. So let's talk about like a task management app, for instance. This is what's broken for an individual. It's like they spend all their time coordinating with their coworkers, trying to figure out, are we on the same page? Are we working towards the same thing? Who has blockers? How can I solve those for them? But then if you zoom out on a societal level, this means that companies are not as productive. We're not solving the biggest problems on earth, whether it's educators or scientific research teams or private businesses or governments. We're just moving slower because we lack this kind of essential infrastructure. So that's kind of the problem statement. You're making somebody feel like there is something truly broken in the world. And that's going to make them lean in and say, I want to know about the solution. And there, you're not telling me a list of features. I often see founders describe their product as like, it does this, it does this, it does this. No, you're telling me a solution, how you solve the problem and how that's actually going to make their lives better. And so back on the problem, some of my, like one of my favorite problem statements was with Uber. If you talked about Uber's problem statement, investors could almost imagine what the solution would be. And so it made it really tangible for them. So like with Uber, if you wanted to call a taxi, you didn't know what taxi company to call. If you called, you didn't know if they were actually going to come. If they came, you didn't know if they were just going to drive away if you weren't waiting in the cold on the curb. Then you didn't know if they were taking the right route. You didn't know if they were a safe, reputable driver. You finally got there. You didn't know how much you should have been paying them. You had to like work out the tip yourself. They never wanted you to pay in cash. There were so many broken parts to this process. And then when you zoom out, you see that at a societal level, it meant that people couldn't patronize businesses on the other side of their city, that like lots of people could not find flexible employment that would work alongside their childcare or their other jobs. And they didn't have a way to earn money in a tough economy where everybody needed to work multiple jobs. And so when you heard that pitch, you could almost imagine a one-tap taxi app that let all sorts of people be able to work flexibly for just a few hours at a time to make money. So then let's talk about the solution. Oftentimes when I hear people talk about the solution, they're like, this is going to be the next Uber, or this is going to, change the paradigm. They like talk about it. This is going to be the next Facebook. They talk about it in these like really high level terms. And they talk about how they're going to be just like some other business, or they use a whole bunch of buzzwords to describe their solution. No. You want to slow down and tell me, why do you make people's lives better? And not just a little better, but exponentially better. This is what I call exponential innovation. A linear innovation is where you take something that already exists and you make it 10% better. You solve some little problem. But the issue there is that people are not going to go over the switching costs, breaking the network effects to switch to your solution if it's only a little better. It needs to be exponentially better. You need to frame your solution as being so much better that it's going to compel people to rip and replace what they're already using to solve this problem, to break their habit of being stuck on the status quo and come over to your solution. And so some of my favorite examples of this are ones like the Asana, which is a major task management app. So my friend, he was one of the co-founders of Facebook, and as the company grew, he spent more and more of his time just doing meetings to figure out if everyone was on the same page. He wasn't actually getting any work done, and so he built a task management solution inside of Facebook. And he realized this was making everybody so much more productive because they could just focus on their work and they knew where everybody else on their team was on that project. But he realized the whole world needs it. So he spun out of Facebook to build his own company called Asana. And instead of having people do work about work, they just helped them focus on what is the most important thing to do each day and get that done while collaborating with the rest of their team. And that unlocked productivity for businesses, unlocked new scientific advancements, and eventually Asana went public for several $billion. Another great, so I think finding what is that solution, how do you describe it in ways that this is how it makes people's lives better, not what the list of features is. And then finally, once you convince them that this needs to exist and the world's going to look a lot better and a lot different once it's ubiquitous, that's when you finally tell them about your story. This is where you reveal what I call your superhero origin story. And so you think about like Batman. Batman's parents were murdered by a mugger in Gotham City, and so he grew up wanting to be a crime fighter. You need to find that same reason why you are never going to quit. The number one reason that startups fail is not because they run out of money or because they're outcompeted. It's because the founders just run out of steam. They lose grit. They just say like, oh, I'd rather go do something else. So you need to convince investors that no matter what happens, no matter what obstacles you hit, you will keep going forward, and that you have that superhero origin story, or maybe a super villain origin story, something that pissed you off so much that you were like, I have got to change this about the world. And so find that story. And you can embellish a little bit. Maybe it was something that was annoying and you're framing it as being like remarkably frustrating and devastating to your lifestyle, but don't lie. Like people will find out if you're lying. Don't fib on your backstory, but you're trying to get them the sense that like you are going to like charge through walls, that you have kind of a blood vendetta to solve this problem. Some of my favorite examples of this are like Jan Koum. He was the co-founder of WhatsApp. When his family, when he was young, his family moved from the Ukraine to the United States, and he felt super isolated from his family because he couldn't afford long distance phone calls. And he didn't get it. If it was just data moving over a line, why should it cost so much money to stay in touch with the people that he loved? And so eventually, even though there were huge chat apps out there already in the world, like iMessage and Facebook Messenger, he convinced investors to back WhatsApp to make a free communication app for everybody in the world, so nobody had to feel as isolated as he did growing up. And I love the ending to that superhero origin story, which was when he signed the $19 billion acquisition from Facebook for WhatsApp, he signed the papers on the steps of the welfare office where his family used to collect checks. That is like a full happy ending superhero origin story. Or another good example is Jack Dorsey. You might know him as the co-founder of Twitter. He also co-founded Square, but his parents ran a pizza place when he was growing up. And increasingly people wanted to pay with a credit card swipe, but credit card swipes had a large fixed fee, like 35 cents. And if somebody was buying a refrigerator, that 35-cent swipe was not a big deal for the merchant. But if they're buying a $3 slice of pizza, that's a huge cut of your profits that you're giving away in the interchange fees to the credit card companies. And so he started Square so that any merchant could take quick credit card payments at just a small percentage fee. So if it was a small purchase, you only paid a small fee. And that unlocked, online commerce for so many merchants. And instead of you having to run to an ATM to get cash or refusing to take credit card payments, everybody could make it easy so that people could pay however they wanted. And so finding that story that shows you are like personally determined to solve this problem is critical. And then you want to give the rest of the evidence. That includes, what is the, why do you have defensibility? Why can nobody else copy your product? Why do you have the best team? You've hired the PhDs, the people who built this before. Your founders have already exited a company in this space. That you have incredible traction. You're growing ridiculously fast. You have remarkable retention. That you've built an amazing go-to-market strategy that other people can't, or you have channel partnerships or some way of making your product more efficient and cheaper that lets you get out in front of all your competitors, or you have the best investors already, that people are already really excited about what you're building, and they're backing you, and you have the backing of people who know how to get this to the finish line. So, you don't tell all that bio stuff until you explain what you're building. So just to recap, problem, drive that sense of emotional resonance, make the investors feel like they're experiencing the problem themselves and that it's holding back society at large. 2, the solution, frame it as an end solution that makes people's lives exponentially better, not linearly better. Don't give me a list of features. Tell me why the world is better after this is ubiquitous. And then finally, the evidence. Why are you the right person? Ideas are a dime a dozen. Why are you 1 in a million? Do you have that superhero origin story and the traction, momentum, defensibility, team, investors that are going to mean that you're going to be the one that wins, even if somebody else has the same idea? So I think that is the basis for all great pitches and great storytelling. And whether you flex that to be a 20-minute pitch where you also cover your competitive landscape and your go-to-market strategies and everything else, or you condense it into 30 seconds and it's one sentence about each of those things, make sure you hit on those 3 points: the problem, the solution, and why you.
Wow. Okay, Josh, I am blown away. You, my friend, but I guess I never heard you give a speech. That was an example, honestly, how you provided value. You explained the most important things, and you gave the stories that made me emotional. I was on a roller coaster, especially with the story of WhatsApp. It's so interesting that, last week, I was talking to my grandmother on a video chat, and she was saying, I'm so glad that we have it, because in her life, she used to not have it. And now my family is from Russia. WhatsApp founders' family is from Ukraine. It really makes a difference. His story how like resonates with my story, and he solved the problem for himself. And it's just like, yeah, you really made me feel it. Like I teared up a little.
Yeah, because like if the more that you frame yourself as your own first customer, the more that people are going to believe that you know what to build next because you're experiencing the problem firsthand. And so rather than framing it as like people have this problem, it's like I experienced this problem. And if you don't experience it firsthand, before you build anything, get out of the building, do 100 interviews with people who actually have that problem firsthand. So you internalize it, build a advisory committee of those like future customers. They're effectively your design partners who that way, every moment you're building in lockstep with what people actually need.
Thank you. That is very, very, very important, Josh. Okay, so this is the narrative. How would you build the investor funnel? Just to skip a little bit to the probably boring part, honestly, but it's very important.
You're totally right. It is the part that it can feel really arduous and honestly really scary if it's something that you are, especially if you're an outsider to Silicon Valley and you don't have a ton of existing connections to VCs. It can feel like this like black box, impenetrable wall of like, how do you get in? But what you really need to understand is that you're not pitching investors. You're not even pitching VC firms. You're pitching individual partners who believe in your sector, in your area. And so you're not trying to figure out who to, like, it's the same with like pitching to press. You don't pitch a publication, you pitch an individual reporter. And so, what I think everyone needs to do before you start a fundraise is to build out a fundraising CRM. So essentially you're listing out, you're going to do your research. There's tools like NFX's Signal. You can just Google who has been investing in major companies in your sector. Google the names of your competitors or other players in sort of adjacent spaces. Look up in things like PitchBook or Crunchbase who are backing the specific subsector that you're in. And you don't want people who are already backing a like directly competitive company because that's a conflict of interest for most investors. But instead, ones who back your general sector and maybe have a gap in the specific area or the specific problem that you're solving. And then what you're doing is you're collecting the names of those funds. Then you're researching who at that fund specifically invests in this area. And then you're figuring out who do you have the best warm connection to? Do you have a direct connection to one of those investors, or do you have overlapping mutual friends on LinkedIn or Instagram or another social network? Or do you know somebody who previously worked with somebody at that firm? Or even better, do you know a founder that made that investor money? That is the golden warm intro, is somebody who actually experienced that firsthand and gave that person, that investor money back. That's, if you can get them to make a recommendation for you, it's super, super powerful. So you're going to build out that whole list. Who is your best warm contact? Is it your CTO who knows somebody who is a technical founder at one of their portfolio companies? Or did you previously work at a company with somebody who worked there? Figure out what your best warm connection is. Then when it's time to start your fundraising process, you do it all at once. This is one of the other biggest mistakes I see founders make, and it can be brutally destructive to your sense of momentum and your ability to generate FOMO amongst investors. I'm going to be real. A lot of investors invest on FOMO. They get scared that they're going to miss a deal, that their competitor is going to get a deal, that their boss is going to ask them, why didn't you get this deal? And so if you can create a sense that there is urgency, everybody wants this and you're fighting for it, it's going to be so much better than you like went through this very slow process. And so oftentimes I see founders get kind of dragged into a fundraise by accident. They do one call with an investor. Maybe they get one inbound interest, or they have one friend who's an investor and they go out and they do a pitch to them. Or even worse, they're like, oh, let's just get coffee. Let's just like build the relationship. Let's warm things up. You are being evaluated. You're always being evaluated. So anytime that you talk to somebody, they are evaluating whether they do or don't want to invest in you. And so even no matter how casual it seems, you have to be really careful about taking those meetings before it's time, because what you want is to condense your whole fundraise process into a few weeks. If it drags out to be months long, people assume nobody wants this deal. And even if it sounds exciting to you, you'll start to get these doubts as an investor that like, why doesn't anybody else want it? Sure, you're supposed to be contrarian. You're supposed to see things that other people don't, but investing in VC has gotten very professionalized. Deals get spread so quickly in the post-COVID era. Everybody's on group chats together. If there's a good deal out there, the good investors typically find out about it. And so you need to make your process go super swift so that everyone feels like there's momentum. So you want to build this whole CRM before you get started. Then you want to get all of your warm intros lined up. And then you want to arm your allies or the people that are going to make those warm intros with a great blurb. You don't want to tell them, hey, can you make an intro to this fund? No, what you want to do is send them a clean email asking them for an intro to a specific firm, or asking them, do they have any great firms that they would recommend you talk to? And in that blurb, you're going to give just a few high-level points about your problem, your solution, your evidence or your superhero origin story, and whatever is the most exciting thing about your company in particular at this stage. Is it that you have wildly fast traction, that you have this super amazing team, whatever is the standout point. And you're just going to give that to them in a 2-paragraph email. Maybe it's a quick paragraph of intro. This is what we do, a few bullets about this is what's exciting. And then here's what we're doing. We're raising our seed round. We're shooting for a $3 million seed round or a $750K pre-seed round. And then you send that to your allies in a fresh email. And then they only have to add a quick little blurb on top of it, super high horsepower founder, or they really understand this sector, or I worked with them previously, one of the smartest people I know. And they don't have to rewrite the whole pitch for you, which is awkward. It also takes them a long time. It slows down your whole process. So arm them with great warm intros. Then you start the whole fundraise process succinctly. You basically are trying to get your product or your business to a place where it's running on its own as best as it can. And ideally, you're at an inflection point. You just signed some big customers. You just had a spurt of growth. Your retention's suddenly doing really well. You have something to say that now is the moment. And when do you raise? You raise when you need the money. You raise when there'd be a lot of things you could move faster on or do better if you had a few more employees, or you could grow a little bit quicker. Not because, you just felt like now is a good time. You raise when you either have an inflection point or it's really time where you're struggling because you're running up against the edges of your resources. So then you start the whole fundraise process at the same time. You try to get as many firms around the table as you can simultaneously, because what you're going to try to do is say, hey, Monday to Wednesday this week or Monday to Friday this week, we're doing our first round meetings with everybody. And then you're going through those meetings. And ideally, a few days later, if you haven't heard back from an investor, you can tell them, hey, just wanted to let you know, we're now starting second round or final round partner meetings with all of these firms. We just want to make sure that if you're interested, you can keep up with that schedule. And that will give them that sense that oh, other people are interested. I have to move quickly. I can't just let this fall to the bottom of my inbox and check in next week. You want to keep them moving. And ideally, if you haven't heard from an investor in a few days, that is a red flag for sure. That means they're probably not interested and you need to re-engage them. And if you're trying to re-engage them, tell them something you've done in the last few days. We closed this customer. We shipped this product. We did this iteration. We did this research to show that even on the scale of days, you are making progress. And then as you move along with the process, then suddenly you're hey, we're in final partner round meetings and we're going to be choosing our lead by the end of the week, or we are accepting our term sheet starting to on Wednesday. And that gives people a sense that, hey, oh, we want to put a term sheet in. We need to get our second round meeting in and our internal discussion in the next few days. And that's how you keep all the VCs moving in sync, because your goal at the end of the day is to get a whole bunch of VCs around the table at the same time so that you have competing term sheets. One of the biggest problems is if you let one firm get way out in front of the others, even if you are successful and they like you, if they give you a term sheet, but they tell you, hey, we need to hear back from you by Friday about whether you're going to accept our term sheet. First of all, if investors are bullying you, being you have 10 hours to respond, that's a bad sign. But if you can get them all at the moving at the same time, then you can play the term sheets off of each other. You can say, you can start to be listen, we're picking based on our best partner, but we just don't want to take as much dilution. And so we if you can maybe be flexible on these specific terms, maybe we have something we can discuss. And so your goal is to get as many terms on the same sheet or on the table at the same time, so you don't end up with this one in the hand or two in the bush. Do we take this lowball offer now because we don't know if we're going to to get more offers, or do we hope that we're going to get a future one and we refuse the current one? Ideally, you get to perfect information. You get all the term sheets at the same time. You can evaluate them. You can negotiate based on that leverage, because it's a lot better to have it if you have the leverage of being able to say, if I don't accept this, I just lose, or I don't get any capital. The best time I think is, we would love to answer some questions, but yeah, this is how I think you run a swift fundraising process and make sure that people feel a sense of like being dragged along with the process or being pulled in, or that when somebody else hears about the story, they're like, oh yeah, like they just started raising last week and they already have like half the round filled, or they already found a lead, or they're already in final round meetings. That gets investors excited, versus if you hear somebody's like, yeah, they've been trying to raise for like 3 months, people are like, well, that doesn't sound like it's for me.
Josh, all great points. And I have the same experience on the legal side when I see the simultaneous engagement with the VC starting. It's really important because sometimes you like two VCs, like they're top tier, but you like one a little bit better. If you engage with them later, they can't do the due diligence at the speed. And I had a situation where the client startup, they had to accept the term sheet, because it's also bad faith to kind of like, kind of accept these, but then talk to others. So you have to be kind of because people talk to each other. And at that time, for example, we decided that the second investor, they would be a warm lead for the Series A. Exactly. But they wanted them in the beginning. So that's why simultaneous engagement is important. One thing that I wanted.
I want to respond to one of the comments. The idea that when do you raise? You don't raise when you're almost out of money. If you have your back against the wall, then that means that like investors can kind of extract tough terms from you, because they know it's like you either raise from me or you vaporize and you're just dead. And so typically we recommend companies raise with more like 9 to 12 months of runway. That way, even if they do kind of whiff on their fundraise and it doesn't go well, they can go back, try to build some more momentum, build some new product, build some new traction, hire some better teammates, and then go back and still have a few months, 6 or like 4 months to be able to go and raise. If you're raising with sub 6 months runway, you will have your back against the wall. And so you don't raise when you are almost out of money. You want to get to a point where you are controlling your own destiny. Eventually you want to be profitable. So you only raise when you feel like it, when you feel like there's real help beyond the dollars that you can get from people, rather than just that you're raising because you desperately need the cash. But, what I am saying is that if you are running and you don't need the money, typically the longer you can go without needing the money, the better, the more traction you get, the more progress you make, and the better terms you'll be able to raise on. So if you feel like, hey, I got plenty of money in the bank, I've still got over a year of runway, I can still keep running for a few more months, get to better traction, get to better milestones. So when I go and raise, I'll be in a much stronger position. And in the end, all that really matters is getting to the metrics that you need for the next round. And so happy to talk about that as well.
Thank you, Josh. Very great points. One example I wanted to give that is a little bit different. Our common friend, Nikhil Viswanathan on Alchemy, he raised insane amount of money he didn't need. And people at that time were like, why are you raising so much money? You don't need, you can like do it at a high evaluation. But then crypto winter came. So it really helped him to go through that crypto winter and do M&As and like grow. So I agree with you totally. In 99.9% circumstances, you don't raise unless you need to, because, hit the milestone, raise at a high evaluation, less dilution for you. But also another strategy, if you are in the market that goes like this, maybe you raise a little bit more than you need. So you're chill when everyone is freaking out.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're in a hyper volatile industry, you need to be planning ahead. And that's why like having a longer runway is critical. And, I think one thing to remember is that startup results are binary. Typically you win or you lose. And it's a lot better to own 40% of a $1 billion company than it is to own 60% of a $0 company. Like it doesn't matter. Like no matter any percentage of zero is zero. And so like if you fail, it's way better to just give a little bit more dilution, take on better partners, and find people and like hire better employees. And maybe you end up with a smaller stake of the company at the end of the day, but you have your hope. Ideally, you're growing the pie, even if your slice is shrinking.
That's correct. And also one wrinkle to that, sometimes you're building a company and you're realizing it's not venture scale. And in that case, it's better to have less dilution because you will have an exit, even $50 million exit where you own like 80% of the company. That's life-changing money for you. So
valuation is critical to understand. It's like, I think it's one of the biggest mistakes I see founders go out and they want to raise at the highest valuation because they think that makes me look powerful and successful. That means I'm rich on paper. That means I've made progress. But no, what it's essentially doing, if you raise at too high of a valuation, it's like putting the finish line way ahead of where it should be. So instead of running an 100-meter dash, suddenly you have to run an 150-meter dash. And so it really puts you at a disadvantage because it's just extending the goalposts for that next round. Every fundraise, you're basically trying to say, this is much money I need, plus some buffer to get to the specific milestones that are going to unlock my ability to raise the next round. Maybe that's getting to 500,000 users or getting to $1 million in annual revenue, whatever that specific unlock is. But if you say, hey, I'm going to raise at a much higher valuation just because somebody makes me an offer at that high valuation, it's just going to make that next round even harder to clear the milestones to get to. And then any little hiccup in the process, and you can be at deep risk of a down round, which creates this death spiral where suddenly investors are scared and employees are scared, and then you're cutting staff, and then you're not being able to service customers, and so they churn, and you just end up in this downward death spiral. And so much better, I think, to raise at conservative, steady step-ups in valuation so that you always feel confident that you can clear that bar, get to that next raise, and keep the train running.
Exactly. And when you choose the term sheets, the most important things, economics and control. Economics, the most important thing is the valuation. I would say that control and having the founder-friendly provisions, if the valuation is reasonable, it's better to take someone founder-friendly with like high valuation, but you lose control of this big machine now that is running at a high speed.
I mean, that said, I think you should taking investment is like marrying someone. Like, you are in bed together for a long time. And if you don't trust them to be on your side throughout, that is the biggest problem. Like, I see some people take on investors where they're like, yeah, they were kind of a jerk through the process. They were slow to respond. They jerked me around. They acted like they were better than me. But I hear they're really smart and they have great connections. I should still let them on the cap table. Every time founders are a year later, they're like, I'm desperately trying to get this person off of my cap table. I'm trying to give them their money back just so I don't have to deal with them anymore. In the fundraising process, VCs should be seducing you as much as you're seducing them. And if they're already being onerous during that process, they're only going to get worse once they have the capital in the company. And so, if you get a sense that this person doesn't really have my back from the start, that is a huge issue. And that's why it's really critical to find people that you trust, as well as to really understand the term sheets and understand control. Things like ratchets and liquidation preferences and things like that can destroy your company later just to protect those investors' capital. And so you should have investors that are so bullish on your company that they don't feel like they need all those control level protections, that they just want to be along for the ride and that they believe that, together you're going to rise all your boats together.
Correct. Yeah. And that's why founder introductions are so important. If a founder introduces you to your new investor, they kind of vet the investor as well. It goes both ways. They're vetting you to the investor and they vet the investor for you. Okay. What is the tips for creating FOMO amongst those you are pitching? The question we got.
Yeah, I think there's always different archetypes of how founders pitch. Some people come in with the very slick, more MBA style, hyper confident, this is just what is going to work, and just get on the train or get left behind style. Some people take a much more humble and mysterious approach where they're trying to create a sense of mystique that just this is really much more visionary. Maybe I don't fully understand it, but the people who work in this industry are going to believe it, and they're going to be incredible at hiring and recruiting. So there's different ways to do it. But in the end, the number one thing you have to convey is charisma, because that is what matters for everything. Your future fundraises, all of your sales, all of your recruiting, all your partnerships is going to come down to your ability to communicate the vision and to be somebody that people believe in and get alongside. So, and a lot of that does come from practice. The more you practice your pitch, the more every metric off the top of your head. You have great sort of of graceful answers to even your toughest questions, that is what's going to like give this sense that like, hey, this is someone I really have to back. I also think, a few other really critical points to get across during your pitch is a sense of co-founder harmony. You and your co-founder should know who answers what question, especially if both of you are going to be on the call or multiple people are going to be on the call, who answers technical questions, who answers product questions, who answers go-to-market questions. Because if you end up in a call being like, maybe you should answer this. No, like I think actually you'd be better at this. There's a sense of like, you don't have good harmony. You don't have good delineation of responsibilities. Everyone's trying to get to consensus on every decision, and you're just going to be moving too slow. Another important characteristic is the sense of like fast learning and iteration. That like when you hit a wall, you don't just shy away from it. You go, you ask everybody you can find, you read everything you can to learn up and skill up on this problem. You try a bunch of things, you rapidly assess if they work, test hypotheses, fail fast, learn, and try again in a different way. That sense of like, hey, no matter what happens in the future, no matter what obstacle we hit, we will find a way around that. That is really critical. And then being constructive and cooperative. I see a lot of founders that because they've spent so much time in their business, when somebody asks them a tough question, like, yeah, I'm like kind of concerned about the go-to-market approach. Is that really going to work? If you take a like defensive approach, like, well, you don't understand our business. Like if you'd ever done this yourself, you know that this is no, like as soon as you start to feel that like combative sense with investors, they're going to feel like they are not going to be somebody that's good to work with, that like takes mentorship well, that's going to be easily advised, that's going to listen to their own teammates. You need to have a sense that like you are open-minded, that you are receptive to feedback. So like even if a VC makes like a kind of dumb suggestion, you should say something like, oh, like I'm really going to think hard about that. And I'm going to talk with my product team. Like maybe that is something that we should explore, rather than like, that's a dumb idea. Like no investor wants to hear that, even if you do think it's a dumb idea. And trust me, investors do have dumb ideas. We got plenty of them. So giving that sense that you are going to be collaborative to work with throughout the process, and that you like that you're easy to work with, and that you're a great manager. Those are going to be really important attributes that no matter what you're building or raising for is going to help you drive that sense of FOMO. One other approach is if you can sign a lead investor, all the other contributing investors get in line. As soon as they feel like it's de-risked because the round is going to close, somebody is backing it, somebody did deeper diligence than me to write the bigger check. That means that like everyone else is going to say, well, if they believe in it, I'm going to believe in it. And you can also use what I call kind of prestige snowballing. And so this is where you find somebody that everyone else would defer to within this space. And then, if you can get them in, even as a small angel check, that's going to be really high signal to everybody else in the space. And, a great example of this was Theranos. Like there's a reason a bunch of really big VCs did not do sufficient diligence on that company. It's because she got a bunch of top, Stanford professors to back her, people who are in that very specific biomedical hardware space. And so when other investors looked at the deal and they said, well, if that Stanford professor is in, the science must work. And so like, I'm going to invest in it. If you can find that high signal person early, that can really open doors for you down the line. And so, if you're trying to build a consumer social app and you can get Nikita Bayer, the kind of like, modern godfather of virality on the cap table, other consumer VCs are probably going to be like, well, if he believes in it, like I believe in it. And you become sort of blind backable. So that's another powerful way to create that FOMO. Another way is like timing press to happen right in the middle of your fundraise. So it feels like, oh yeah, we're just like constantly being talked about, like everybody knows about us. And you get this extra external validation point where when a VC goes and looks you up, they find this third-party proof point that says, yes, this founder does have like a solid vision. They do have a great opportunity. It's also really powerful for recruiting as well. But yeah, as many ways as you can make them feel like they're hearing about you from all angles at once. And this is moving super quickly. And this is a team that's going to learn fast, take instruction, take guidance, and has great co-founder harmony, because that's the other biggest killer of startups is just like co-founder infighting. And so if you can find somebody that you really jive with, ideally you've worked with for years before, that you've really built things with, not just like you found through some co-founder matchmaking thing, that's going to also drive a lot of confidence that you're going to be around for the long run.
To piggyback on that, the only time when I saw a lead investor after signing the term sheet, they pulled it off only because there was like a founder mismatch. And it wasn't obvious. It wasn't co-founder divorce. But I started noticing that when the main co-founder started asking me to make changes in the bylaws so he can make the decisions on his own. I'm like, okay, does not smell well. And no surprise, investors found out during their due diligence that there is something between them. They pulled the term sheet. The company went down in a couple of years. So that's in my 8+ years experience. This is the only time when an investor just pulled the term sheet after we were doing due diligence. We were like going all the way through, and not even another deal. CEO founder was getting $1 million a year, and even then during due diligence, that didn't scare them off. Like they invested, but like a founder divorce is even worse than a high salary.
Oh yeah, and I would say the one last thing that's really important in a process is that at the end of every VC pitch, you need to leave time to ask them what is their biggest concern. Because if you let them leave that meeting with a big question mark still in their head, every VC thinks they're going to go have time to do all the research and answer that. But if you walk away feeling unsure, it's pretty rare that it later becomes a yes. But if you ask them up front, hey, why would you pass on this? Or what is your biggest concern? Or what scares you the most about our business? You can at least get a chance to rebut that and say, oh, you think this competitor is a big issue? This is actually why they're not. Why we have a better business model. They have the wrong team. This is conflicting with their overarching business model. If it's your go-to-market strategy, it's oh no, we've actually done this before. We've proven this out. We have these amazing partners. Make sure you find out why they would pass and rebut them. And then even if they do pass, make sure you ask why, because a lot of VCs will try not to tell you. They kind of want to save face. They don't want to say, I'm worried about the go-to-market model. And then your go-to-market explodes and you crush it. And then they feel really stupid. And they're worried that you won't come back to them for the next potential raise because you were wrong about this specific thing. No, tell them, listen, we're not going to hold this against you. We'd love to talk to you about the next round, but we'd really like to understand why you passed. And then that's how you debug your pitch. That's how you figure out what is not resonating, or where are you still leaving question marks on the table? And then you can go back and fix those so that your next pitch is constantly getting better. You're always iterating, just like on your product.
Thank you, Josh. Incredible packed session. One last thing that I wanted to ask: what do you think about investor updates email? Even if you have one investor, but you create the email list with investors, is it a good strategy?
Yes, always. Founders, I think, who send good investor updates, there's a few huge advantages. First, it's an accountability mechanism. It makes you feel like every week I better be getting something done. Otherwise, what am I going to say in this investor update? It also gives you an opportunity to pit VCs against each other, to tell your investors, you give a big thank you to anybody who's done something helpful. And then every VC is going to want to show up in your next thank you section being like, oh, I did something and introduced them to a customer. I helped them hire somebody. Make sure that you're making them compete to give you assistance. It also gives you this long-term track record that when you talk to new investors, you can actually show them, hey, this is how fast we're iterating and how quickly we have our progress. Just look at our last 3 months of investor updates. It also makes it easy for investors to send you to to other investors and say, hey, this might be a fit for you with their next round. It seems like they're starting to inflect, or they're really hitting this breakout, or they've had this technology breakthrough. And so it gives just more opportunities for people to make warm introductions on your behalf. So yeah, sending them on the first of the month consistently, I think is really powerful. And if you're ever worried about what goes in them, take whoever's on your board or your closest ally on your cap table or a founder peer and send it to them first and say, hey, does this sound right? Making sure that there's nothing that might stick out and scare investors. And then you can send it to the rest of the crew.
What if you haven't raised anything yet? What if you just start the fundraising process and you just generate the momentum by keeping them in the loop? Do you think it's a good strategy, or no, you just schedule the meetings and without any emails?
No, I think in between, like I said, you should be making sure they feel like you're constantly making progress. They're hey, in the 3 days since we last did this talk, or since we last spoke, we closed this customer, shipped this product, and and found this, partner for our channel partnerships, or we signed this deal with an influencer to do a great influencer marketing deal. It shows that you are not wasting time ever, and that even when you're raising, which is a huge distraction, that you're still making momentum and you're still making progress. So you constantly want to give the feeling that this train is leaving the station and you want to be on board.
Yes. And you don't have to send individual emails. You can have this investor updates, and everyone gets to see the progress. And when the right moment comes, you just, okay, now we're raising, we need something. It's going to be more natural.
And even if you find somebody who's like, hey, maybe you're not a fit right now, like, can I add you to our investor update email list? Like, they almost will always say yes. And that's how you build a longer term relationship over time, so that when it is time, they're not coming in cold. They say, oh yeah, this person like consistently sends thoughtful updates and makes big iterations and fast progress every week or every month. This is somebody I think we should take a real look at.
Thank you, Josh. Guys, I didn't want to talk about due diligence today because I think Josh gave so much value, and I want to keep it just at this. I just wanted to focus on this because this is very important, right? You got to get the money in, then you can afford hiring me and cleaning up your things. But one only horror story that I will tell you that, when investors come in and do due diligence on you, the only time when I advise investor not to invest when the founders were backdating the documents. So when there is like any sign of, not fraud, but you can't trust the founder. That's why it's really bad. But overall, we have a due diligence package that you can purchase for $3,500, and we will review all of your documents to make sure you're prepared, to make sure once you get the term sheet, it's not going to be pulled off. But business and doing business, right? That's the most important part, that you have the traction. As Josh noted, the legal due diligence doesn't replace it. We just make sure that once you get the momentum going, you're not going to be stopped at the due diligence process. And I'm also sharing the fundraiser tracker, everything that Josh was saying, listing the VC funds, what is your warm introduction? I just gave you the template in Notion, and also due diligence checklists right here. So you have all of this, and we will send recording to everyone. Josh, that was just incredible. Thank you. This is a good example of a person who just like gave so much value. Great examples, took us on the emotional ride. I think that's the example of pitching. Like, I would give, if you were asking for money, I would give it to you. Just like not asking for money, Josh. So that's a great example.
In fact, I am giving money away. So I invest 50 to 100K checks in pre-seed information stage startups with a focus on consumer. And our venture fund SignalFire, it's $2.1 billion early stage fund. We write lead checks seed to Series B, and we've been building AI in-house for a decade to help our portfolio companies with their number one concern, which is always recruiting as well as go-to-market. And so if you're looking for a firm that can really help you with deep assistance on recruiting and go-to-market, would love to hear about it for SignalFire. And if you're right at the beginning of your journey and you want help with organic growth and PR, I'd love to hear more about what you're building. I put my Twitter and LinkedIn links in the chat, so please follow up with me, and I'd love to learn more about what you're doing.
And that was Josh Constine. Thank you so much, Josh.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it.